This is the Sales Bible Podcast, episode 367, Friction-Free Influencing, an interview with Harry Mills.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hello, Sales Babblers. This is Pat Helmers. Many years ago, Harry Mills' Rainmaker sales book greatly influenced me to become the sales manager that I am today. In this episode, Harry gives us an update on the need for friction-free influencing, given the power shift from the seller to the buyer. With compassionate curiosity, Harry believes that sellers can aspire to get buyers into a state of self-persuasion. And so, with no further ado, let's get to it. Welcome, Harry. Are you ready to babble?
I'm ready to babble.
Harry, you are the author of the book, The Rainmaker's Toolkit, and I bring this up for a reason, and I'm holding it in my hand as we speak. I think I bought this book maybe 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. And first time I was a sales manager, this was the book that I used for sales training, and it was phenomenal.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is that that for me, I was very proud of that book, and I was proud of it, and I was very lucky that the Americans embraced it far faster than anywhere else in the world, right? That somehow, there was a sophistication in professional service markets that people understood the logic. And I think it was because I've spent most of my life analysing American businesses and practices. So I suspect I always thought that if you want to find what's the best in something, particularly in marketing and sales, you may find the worst in one part of the United States, but you'll definitely find the best somewhere as well. And that's what I've always loved about the place. And you've got variations of what's going on. But so professionally, there were lots of examples out there, and it went down well. But the interesting thing is, to bring us up to date, that what I thought when we did it, we were right at the edge. In fact, we were about 10 years ahead of most people in terms of what we were doing. But now what we're talking about today is really that while many of the tools are correct in that book, the fundamental way that you influence needs to be changed.
Why do you say that? What's different now than was the case?
Well, it's a very good question to say that, but I think there's a magic date in American history. It's 2011.
Oh.
Right? Now, 2011 is the date that over 50% of Americans owned cell phones, smartphones. And once 50% of any population has access to a smartphone, they have computer technology that could take them to the moon, but they have access to all of the information and advice. So basically, all of a sudden, consumers and business buyers came on behind because they're consumers, right? So that when they believe they had the information, something actually happened. Because when we're persuading someone, there's two sorts of things. So the traditional technique for selling has been what I would call direct persuasion. It's a form of tell and sell. There's an information component. You need to find out some information about whatever's been sold. And then there's a persuasion component. And until 2011, in many cases, and that just happens to be the tipping point, there was largely a notion that I need to get salespeople or the businesses help to find out what I need to know. So what happens when you start to believe I don't need the information? And when I don't need the information, I don't need the help as well. So there was almost a reciprocal part of the old style of selling. That if you invested your time into equipping me with the information, I reciprocated by listening to your recommendations and your talk about benefits and features and everything else. The two went together. But when you didn't provide me with the information, I didn't feel I needed to actually listen to what you were selling. And I think that exposed more than anything what was going wrong. Already by 2011, sales force productivity, particularly in the business-to-business space, was starting to drop. That customers were pushing back. There was an increase in resistance. But there was a huge increase in resistance after 2011. And I think what then the reaction is what's causing this. And most people will say, people have got access to the internet, they've got access to better, cheaper product, so we need to get better, cheaper product. But in actual fact, you've changed the game. You've changed, when the customer's got the power, you actually need to change the way you sell.
You had to go to the seller in order to even get the information. Like I think about buying a car. I had to go to a dealer to get one of those nice glossy folders. I couldn't go online and look up a car.
Yeah, and I think what you've actually found the classic, I mean, I'm old enough to exactly the same. I bought my first car, and when I went and bought the first car, I had to go to the dealership. When they turned up onto your dealership, you had control of the process. You know they hadn't been through the sales process. So you walked them through the 6 steps. You introduced to them. You asked them questions about their trade-in or whatever it is. So you had a whole disciplined sales process, which went from building rapport to uncovering needs to demonstrating the vehicle and then closing the deal. And you just systematically worked that process.
Is there a way for sellers to take control of this situation?
Yeah, it is. And I think the big thing to go back is that in actual fact, we've never had control of it. Go back to realistically, in the end of the day, people have always been suspicious about people who sell with a combination of, the pitch and then the benefits. We've got all sorts of words in our dictionary. There's more words that mean hustler in American than any other dictionary in the world. So, but we put up with it, and we thought we'd find a good salesman, and we'd go to the thing. But what we've never realised is, in fact, that there's actually there are 2 ways to sell, or there are 2 ways to influence. One of them is called direct persuasion, and direct persuasion is the default method. That's the way, particularly in the United States, that people have actually grown up. Trying to convince somebody to buy with your reasons and your recommendations always generates pushback. We're wired. We hate being told what to do. And there's actually a second way, and there's only one alternative way of selling to somebody. What if you change it? What if you flip the script? If you change from direct persuasion to what is called self-persuasion, help people convince themselves. That's right. If you flip that and you turn the statements into questions and the recommendations into guided choices, and you throw in a story to give you basically a beginning to end framework, wow, you've got self-persuasion. And because what you're doing eliminates the pushback, the resistance, I called it friction-free influencing. In fact, the name friction-free influencing came from an interview I did on radio in the United States. And someone said, I love your self-persuasion, Harry, but tell me how it works. And I said, it works like oil in a car. I said, oil in a car eliminates the friction. I said, when the friction increases in a car, the car first stalls and then it conks out. It gives up altogether. And exactly the same thing happens with relationships. And magically, if you use questions to control the conversation and then put the guided choices in and have some compelling story that, if you like, wraps it all up, your success rate goes up 300 or 400%. And the reason is you don't push people away. You don't get drop out, because what you're doing is you're building fast trust. And fast trust is the absolute key. Who do I trust? I trust myself above everybody, and I trust my own reasons. Self-persuasion or friction-free influencing helps people uncover their own reasons.
You said something interesting. This is something that Socrates talked about 2,500 years ago.
Yeah, and there's no doubt about it that we've been talking about it. We've always been aware that people change their own minds for their own reasons, right? They talked about persuasion and rhetoric, and that's the other thing. What actually happened is we actually developed a technique called the disciplines of rhetoric. And what we never did was actually develop a process which people could actually advance. But what's killed the traditional technique and made from a sales force much more unprofitable is that you just can't afford to have the failure rate that's built into direct persuasion.
Maybe you could give us a specific example or some practical advice that our listeners could take where they could actually have a behavior that promotes friction-free influencing.
Well, I think that what we do is we actually we do two things really with people. When we teach people to practice after we've trained them, we show them how to develop fast trust with a stranger, how to go up to any stranger and to actually chat to them and actually develop fast trust by developing what we call compassionate curiosity. So to actually show that you're really interested in the person and you develop a form of fast trust, right? So how do you do it? Well, we use an acronym called SOFTENS. You smile, and it comes from Mandela actually. You use an open posture. You talk about what you have in common, which is a fused identity, right? You shake hands, or even better, you ritualize the interaction, which most advanced societies do. You make eye contact, you nod to prove you're listening, and then you summarize everything that's actually there in depth, because so you prove to the person you've heard and you can trust it. And that's what Mandela did on Robben Island. That's how he came almost to dominate the Robben Island prison. So that's the beginning. So when you say to someone, look, what you need to do is to switch to questions, it's not that hard. People know how to switch for questions. A good example is brainstorming, right? Brainstorming, we're taught, that's about throwing statements out, right, and putting them on the light board, right? But brainstorming the traditional way doesn't work. But if we brainstorm with questions, all of a sudden we get traction, we get buy-in, we get innovation. The same thing happens. Now, your guided choices, you think about how you would influence your children at home. Can you tell them what to do? Can you tell them when to go to bed? Can you tell them when they to eat something? Most people can't. What they develop are techniques. They say, here's a choice. You can do this or you can do this. When you're dressing somebody for bed, you say, well, do you want to wear the white pajamas or the blue pajamas? And a smart little kid will come back and say, I'll have the white top and the blue pants, right? So basically what you're doing is you're actually showing people how to build trust and create choices. When you say to someone, look, shift to questions, you just, for the moment, once you're asking questions, what resistance are you getting? You're actually cultivating curiosity. When you actually create direction and give them guided choices, what you're doing through choice is actually empowering them to make a decision. And when you throw in a story framework around it, what you're also then doing is actually providing the motivation to do something. Now, you look back to any other sales situation and say, right, it's not as easy and it's not as powerful, and if you need a big sale, for example, means that you've actually got to do a big business-to-business sale. You've actually got to build a relationship with 6 or 7 people. They'll all have different needs and different concerns, and if you're using questions and choices, you'll build that relationship. If you're using primarily statements and recommendations, no matter how powerful, you'll get it wrong somewhere on the line. In fact, you'll get it wrong about 4 out of 7 times.
What's interesting about this idea of how to quickly build, how to fast trust strangers, most of this can still be done on a Zoom call, can't it?
Well, yes and no. It's a good question. Zoom, I've just been, before this call, I've been helping a company in the UK who's actually got that's not Zoom, but Zoom, the problem with Zoom is 2 things tend to happen. People tend to look at the medium and they use it as a tell and sell medium, right? That's almost the notion. The second thing is you've got no body language to read. And so, therefore, Zoom fatigue things. But if you change your technique on a Zoom call and try and guide it through a series of structured questions, that actually pulls the person to. And if you add in the thing, here I'm going to throw in an extra 2 of the choices. Here's the magic word. If I say, imagine, Patrick, you could do this or you could do this, which one of these seems to appeal to you most, right? That word imagine. You see, we're wired to imagine. Questions evoke the curiosity. When we frame the choices as imagined choices going forward, we can't resist that as easy. And on a Zoom call, you're actually reducing the fatigue because the person who's here, you are in Chicago and I'm in Wellington, but you're actually imagining what you would do. And then if you use what I call a story which has got a framework which says that someone shows an example of what someone similar to you facing a similar challenge and how they conquered it and how they move forward, that is what we've always used around the campfire. We've learnt lessons on how to behave come from the stories we share around the campfire.
Yeah. Harry, if people wanted to find you online, where would they go?
harry.mills@ahaadvantage.com.
And your latest book is called?
Zero Resistance.
Zero Resistance. And I'm assuming we can all find that on the big bookstore.
But the interesting thing is get people to come in because we've actually developed a whole lot. I'm bringing out a new book called Friction-Free Influencing, which is going to be called How to Turn Others into Brothers and Resistors into Sisters.
I love it.
Hey,
guess
which country I'm aiming that one at, right? But the interesting thing is that the techniques that you use to deal with problems in your community are actually, for example, ever since I've started doing friction-free influencing, a large number of the customers have come from organisations facing big transformational issues. How do we get buy-in? Because that's what everybody's looking for. How do we get buy-in? How do we transform a sales organisation? And how do we get buy-in? And it's because we call it friction-free transformation. So if people want to talk to us about that and the wider issues, we can talk very easily either by a Zoom call or WhatsApp.
Harry, it's an honor to meet you after all these years. I'm so glad you've agreed to be a guest here on Sales Babble.
Well, thank you also for the pleasure. It's always nice to know that someone's used your books.
Thank you very much for visiting us.
Great.
Sales Babble is sponsored by Habanero Media, a podcasting agency that produces B2B interview-based podcasts. A podcast is the premier way for a business to boost its brand, authority, influence, and trust. With podcasts, companies grow revenue by meeting influencer and prospects through the interview process. If you've ever thought about starting a podcast to grow your business, go to habaneromedia.net for advice, help, and classes on how to start a B2B podcast. That's habaneromedia.net with an H. To connect with Harry and to learn more about direct persuasion versus self-persuasion, you can find him in the show notes at www.salesbabble.com. And if you have a question or a comment about this episode or any other episode, click the Babble Me button, and that will connect directly to me, Pat Helmers. Also, if you've been thinking about starting a podcast, reach out to me about that, or go to the website habaneromedia.net, that's habanero with an H, for help, advice, and classes on how to start a business podcast. If you haven't done so already, like, share, and subscribe to Sales Babble so you never miss an episode. And with that said, that's all I've got for this week. Until next Tuesday, take care, folks, and have a highly successful and a profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.
This is a production of Habanero Media.